I'd like to have a conversation with Nikil Viswanathan. He's someone who I've known for a really long time. He's also a Stanford grad. And I sent out his bio over Piazza, but a quick summary is that, he built this really mega viral app called Down to Lunch. It was both an iOS and an Android app. It was a #1 social app in 2016. And there were actually a ton of news. I remember seeing a bunch of the news articles about it. I was like, wow, I downloaded the app. I used it. It was super, it was like a simple but really powerful app. And then I'll let Nikil describe what happened to it. It's kind of an interesting story. And then right now, Nikil is the co-founder and CEO of Alchemy, which is a blockchain development platform, which it powers some of the largest blockchain companies in the whole world. And so that's a little bit of the formal intro. Nikil, you're online. Let me stop sharing my screen. And then I'd like you to actually give a quick intro about your background and anything else you want to share.
Sweet. Awesome. Thanks for having me, Rahul. And great to meet all of you guys. I'm Nikil. I'll give a little bit about my background, but I'm happy to talk about whatever. So I went to Stanford. I lived in Otero freshman year, and I spent actually 6 years at Stanford. So I'm huge Stanford. I did undergrad in a slow termed and stayed there as long as I could. So I'm happy to talk about my experience at Stanford, my experience post-Stanford. I also have a lot of stories for what, actually really quickly, can we go on? How many of you are freshmen? Like raise your hands or like do like the thumbs up thing. Sophomores? Juniors? Juniors? Okay, got some juniors. Seniors? Co-term?
Yeah, I think just giving some more context, I think for people who are watching the recording, I think, Nikil, we have like roughly, I would say half the class is actually grad students and then half undergrad. And of the undergrad, I would say the majority are juniors or seniors.
Got it. Okay, great. Perfect. So for those of you who have who are doing the CS course, it's mostly CS.
Yeah, mostly CS.
Okay, cool. So happy to talk about my journey at Stanford. Happy to talk about a lot of your favorite professors were friends, roommates of mine. Keith Schwartz lived 2 doors down from me freshman year. Chris Peach and I were roommates for a really long time post-college, and even we were good friends. We were kind of same year in school. Jerry Kane and Miron are actually 2 of our investors, and have, since this is recorded, I probably can't share a lot of stories, but we like party together in various places around the world. So a lot of great stories around that. So happy to share about that, and also can talk a little bit about the journey of how we built Down to Lunch and apps and post that. So I'll give a quick overview, but feel free to interrupt, feel free to ask questions, want this to be interactive and as helpful as possible. So let me give a little bit of my background and how we kind of had this kind of crazy journey, and then I'll leave it for kind of slightly open-ended for people to jump in, but I'll just keep talking unless someone jumps in. So I grew up in a small town in Texas called Lubbock that's like no one's ever heard of. Came to Stanford, did my undergrad in artificial intelligence, computer science, artificial intelligence. This was funny because it was right before the deep learning stuff happened. So I spent like 6 years doing all this like really hardcore computer vision and all this stuff. And then like literally like 2 years later, deep learning happened. Everything I learned was kind of irrelevant. I mean, it's still very interesting and cool, but really, really loved it. Had the time of my life at Stanford. Always knew I had kind of wanted to build products and kind of like build things that people used. And so we started built this one product that ended up, it was this events calendar that showed you where the events were on campus. Cause like back in the day, there was like no good way to do that. I'm guessing there's probably still not a really great way to do that. It ended up being spread out. We ended up going to like schools around the country. And it was kind of the first thing that accidentally we built that turned into a company. So I was doing that for a little bit, have some crazy stories about that, how like the team kind of like fell apart, and it was like really rough journey for me, but a great learning experience. And then after that, in my summers, I'd actually done product management at Facebook, Google, Microsoft. So a lot of big company stuff, even though I always knew I wanted to do small company and do startups. And then post-college, I graduated, I did my undergrad and co-term. So I took 2 years for my co-term. I loved it. I wanted to stay forever. I was like that kid who won the award in the dorm, like most likely voted most likely to never leave campus, right? That was like always me. So #1 Stanford fanboy. I literally bought like 2 Stanford hats the other day, and I was talking to our lawyer who's actually, it's like big shot top lawyer in Silicon Valley, and he was also Stanford, and he was telling me, oh yeah, the bookstore had like a sale on hats, so I bought like 20 of them. I was like, oh, I bought it like the week before. I can't believe I didn't know this. So the bloodline runs strong even after you graduate. So there's always like this instant bond you have. So after I graduated, had started this company with this guy, and had gone through like a pretty rough period in my life, honestly, where I had, it really wasn't working out. We tried working on this product together. It didn't really work out. The product wasn't really working. I had moved one block off campus. So if you guys know where the Caltrain station or Dar Bar, or basically the patio. So we lived right next door to the patio, these two houses of 10 guys. I actually didn't realize at the time, Stripe was started out of that house a little bit before we were there, and Yahoo was actually out of that house also. So John from Stripe had like come by to pick up his stuff, and we were hanging out. And Jerry Yang, the founder of Yahoo, is actually one of our investors, and he was telling me how he actually lived in that house at the same time. So it's kind of this like legacy of people who built things.
I'll just chime in here really quick. I actually visited Nikil in that house. I don't know if you remember this, Nikil. This must have been, I don't know what, 2013, 2014. I visited you, and I remember you showed me the house, and you had like literally 5 or 10 different side projects. There was one where you have like, you use your phone as a lightsaber and you like show something on the wall. It was like Nikil's been doing side projects and real projects for years. So I just remember that was really memorable.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We had like 5. So it was me, a bunch of other friends. Chris Peach actually lived with us do you guys know Chris Peach? Yeah. So me and a few other friends got the house. Chris was one of the people. We all lived there together. It was like this startup / party house, like where we like automated all this stuff in the house, and we had all these like the Hue lights had just come out, so we wrote a bunch of code for those. We had this like Harry Potter wand, that's what Rahul was talking about, and we had like computer vision stuff, and we'd also have a bunch of parties. It was really fun. It was like a great time post college, and I had gone through this really rough time where I graduated. I turned down all the job offers. I didn't apply to any jobs. I turned down all the job offers. When I was at Facebook the summer before, there was one desk next to Mark, and totally random chance that happened to be my desk. I was just some random intern. So at the end of the summer, Mark was like, "Hey, you really got to come back." And I was like, "No." They're like, "We'll pay you a bunch of money." And I was like, "No, I got to do my own thing." And like, they do a really good job recruiting. Sat me down with the whole exec team. I was like, "No, got to do my own thing." So was doing it. Didn't turn out the way I expected. 6 months out of college, I realized my happiness had gone from here, like max happiness, love Stanford, to really kind of like, I was super sad. I'd broken up with the co-founder, the company wasn't working. I had broken up with a long-term girlfriend. I was like, wow, this sucks. It's like max happiness to really, really, really low. And I thought about my life a lot, right? And I was really lonely. I was like, doing a startup is super lonely in the beginning, especially when you're just by yourself. You go from being around all these friends at school or like in work to working by yourself. And then I realized the number one thing that I had this aha moment, or aha like week and a half, where I realized the number one thing that determines your life is actually the people you're around, right? Like imagine, I mean, I hope you guys had like a really great freshman dorm experience, but for me, like my freshman dorm, literally my freshman roommate like texted me yesterday, right? And like that's the kind of, and we're like planning a trip together. So it's like, that's the kind of like really, really tight knit community I had. And I think the single best thing Stanford does is really create that amazing atmosphere. So, and they're really amazing community. So, I realized, I was like, what if you just make it feel like Otero forever, like you're a freshman dorm? And what everyone said was, number one, that would be the best thing ever. But number two, it's not possible because you're not physically present with people, right? And I think when I think about my life, backing up, you only have one shot at life, religion, reincarnation aside, right? You have one chance to really have a big impact. So why not try to hit that home run? Like, why not try to have a big impact, right? And for me, the way I measure my life is on 2 axes. Your x-axis is how many people's lives do you touch? And your y-axis is how deeply do you impact their life every day, right? It's like the number of people times depth of impact. And the area under that curve is the impact that you have upon the world. And it's so crazy because like never before in human history could you press buttons on a magic metal box, like what Rahul was teaching you to do, and build something that impacted life for every person on the planet. Like this is such a crazy thing. Like when you think about it in perspective, think about 20 years ago, right? Before 20 years ago, what were the major forces that shaped our world today? It is, government, it's religion, it's like countries, like it's this scale of things that shaped our world up till this. Now, what is it? It's technology. Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, these companies have more impact on people's lives around the world than any country in the world, than any religion. It's like crazy to think about, right? And it's so crazy because, I'm a little older than you guys. So I put, the guys who made Facebook were, 2-3 years older than me. Like Mark went to school with my cousin. The guys made Snapchat were like around like my year and below. The Instagram was actually a competitor with that events calendar thing we were doing before they pivoted to another thing, which worked out really well for them, right? And Google was the Larry and Sergey were in class with my other cousin, and when I was an intern, I was hanging out with Larry and Sergey. And what you realize, like, these are just normal people, and it all happens in the square mile around, where you're living right now, or I don't know if you're actually on campus, but on campus, right? And it's such a crazy experience to think about that the people in this Zoom right now, and anyone else around the world, but especially you, like, you have the tools to sit in your room and build something that potentially impacts billions of people. And that is wild, right? And I think one of the things I see so much, and I don't need to pitch you guys on this because you're obviously studying computer science, but I see so much, like so many people my age or even younger or older, anyone who's not an engineer is like, wow, I so wish I could go back and redo my life and be an engineer, right? And not necessarily because you want to be an engineer the rest of your life, but because it gives you the ability to create and build things. So one of the things, so kind of back to the two axes, for me, this was always obvious, right? I was like, never before in human history can I do this and build something that affects millions of people, right? Billions of people. So, and it happened to be what I was really good at, what I really loved. So I was like, all right, that's what I'm gonna do. And the y-axis, when I was like, how do you really impact people's lives? How do you really have a positive impact? And for me, going back to this kind of like life-changing, kind of life introspective experience I had, when, you have to sometimes hit that really, really low to really push yourself to think about life. So I went back and I was like, all right, this is what I want to do. I want to make it feel like you live with your friends even when you're not physically close to them, right? Like, what if it always felt like you're in that freshman dorm? I was like, all right, this is what I'm gonna do with my life, right? And I don't tell most people this, but I'll tell you guys, I really felt like I could do this for people all around the world. If I can do this for every person on the planet and I can help them have the people they truly care about in their life every day, that's like maxing out my potential to contribution to the world. So I was like, all right, this is what I'm gonna do. Turns out it's way harder than I thought. We spent like 4 years building a billion different products. Like I think my co-founder and I, we built my co-founder also went to Stanford. He was a year below me. We actually met because we TA'd the database class. It was funny because when we did the database class, I don't know if Jennifer Whittam's still teaching, but we had TA'd the class, and that quarter, is Andrew Ng still there? I think he came back. Okay, Andrew came back. I actually ran into him in Palo Alto last year. I was like, oh, hey, what's up? We're talking at this restaurant. And this guy, I kid you not, this guy comes up next to us and he's standing there. And then and Andrew's like, hey, how's it going? He's like, can I get a photo with you? And he hands a camera to his girlfriend. I was like, Andrew, are you the Justin Bieber of Palo Alto? This did not happen when we were there. So he's apparently a celeb now. So anyway, yeah, so where's it? Oh yeah, really quickly, how I met my co-founder. We actually TA'd this class, and Andrew and Daphne Kohler, I think he was gone, and Jennifer Whittam, the professors said, hey, what if instead of just having the 120 students in CS 145, we opened up to everyone else in the world and anybody could sign up and use it, which sounds so obvious today because everyone's doing it, but no one had done this before, right? And they're like, okay, cool. So normally databases is a great class to TA. It's really fun. It's really easy. It's easy to TA. You have 100 students. That quarter, it had 120,000 students. It was the craziest quarter to TA. So I was up all night the night before, writing code to generate PDF certificates. If any of you have written code for PDF, it's crazy. The PDF format is crazy. Anyway, the next quarter, that became Coursera. So Joe and I were kind of the first unpaid employees of Coursera. I mean, we were paid, we was joking about that. Sorry, Jennifer, if you're watching this. But anyway, so it was a really cool experience. And I think the Joe and I, so back to kind of post-college, we're building apps. We built probably 12 apps. None of them worked. Literally we had this idea. We're people are going to love this. People are just going to love it. It's going to be awesome. We sent it out. No one likes it, right? And it was really tough. It was super, super tough. And then one day we were like, man, we moved. So we lived in this house, and back in the day, Silicon, kind of South Bay, was the center of tech. There weren't really many really great companies up in SF. But after this, during this transition period, there started to be companies going to SF. So this was probably, I think, 2014. So Joe and I moved to San Francisco. So we moved to San Francisco. I'm the small town kid. Everyone thought, I could have said, everyone was shocked I moved to the city. I always thought I would live in Palo Alto, right? I could have said I got married, I got shot. People would be less surprised than I moved to San Francisco. So we moved to San Francisco, and the reason we moved to San Francisco is because we wanted to be around our friends, and we also wanted to be around kind of people who are building really cool things in the space, because it really matters, right? And even with kind of the decentralization, when people are like spreading out of San Francisco and Bay Area right now, it's like being around people who are building other things is really, really important, and that's like one of the most, again, the people you're around on a daily basis hugely impact your life. So we moved to San Francisco to be around our friends, and what happens, right? We even got like a giant office. There's just the two of us, and we rented it to all our friends so we could all be together. We literally worked 24/7. And whenever we were free, we were like, let's hang out with people, which was like never, right? And then of course we text one or two of our friends, and they'd be like, oh, I'm busy. So then Joe and I would just go to the gym together. So anyway, long story short, there's these two other friends who, have you guys heard of Heap Analytics? They're an analytics company. They're doing super well. They're like, I don't know, worth many hundreds of millions. So we'd actually TA'd them in school, and we'd always walk to Safeway to get these like $5 combo boxes. It was like the cheapest, healthiest, tastiest food at the time you could get in San Francisco. And we'd always run into them walking at Safeway, and we were like, oh, we should hang out. And then of course we like never hung out, right? And whenever we're free, we don't know who to text. It's just this whole problem. So one day we were like, dude, this is so annoying. Like, what if we could just press a button and it would text all our friends automatically and be like, do you want to hang out? So we don't have to text everyone individually. And we were like, oh yeah, we're like, Joe and I are like, yeah, that'd be cool. And we basically were like, oh yeah, we could build it in like 3 hours. Also, whenever any engineer, and this is what you'll realize, like whenever you think like, oh, this is going to take like 3 hours, always it's the pi rule, always multiply it by 3, because it's just going to take way longer than you think. So it took us about a day, because it was like Saturday at like 2 p.m. The gym closed at like 8 or 6 or something. And we're like, oh yeah, we could totally build this before the gym closes, right? And then go to the gym. Turns out that's not the case. So we built this app. It was so simple. And I'll try to tie in some of the lessons we learned and some of the ideas, the kind of so I probably have a Dropbox folder of 30 different products that I've built. And through this company, probably total my life, I probably built close to like 60 things, maybe 50, maybe like 50, just like random ideas. Some of them are stupid, simple websites, like little hack things I do. But one of the most important traits I see in people who are like really successful is they've tried a bunch of things. I remember playing chess with Mark at Facebook, and I was like, dude, did you know like Facebook was going to be the thing that made it successful? He's like, no, man, I built like 9 things before Facebook. Even while Facebook was blowing up, we thought this other thing called Wireshark would be really successful. So that's the first thing. What I really encourage is really just build a bunch of stuff and put it out there. Like that, you never know. Most products, which people thought, literally when Evan Spiegel when he did his product design class, and he worked on Snapchat, and they showed Snapchat, and the VC was like, this will never work. If you make the photos not disappear, and literally this is word for word he said, if the venture capitalist was like, if you make the photos not disappear and partner with Best Buy to show products and app, like that'll work. And it's like, what, right? So the point here, so a couple of lessons here. It's super, super important to just build a bunch of stuff. And this is kind of geared towards if you want to do a startup, if you want to build really great products. Super, super important to build a bunch of things. The second thing is you never know what's going to work or not until you try, right? And this is a really difficult thing. Even the best product people in the world, if you look at it, right, it's like even like the Mark Zuckerberg or like all these people who are amazing at product. There's like sub 10 people in the world who are like the best at consumer product in the world, right? Even them, it's really hard to build. Why didn't Facebook build TikTok? Why didn't Facebook build, Snapchat? Why didn't Facebook build? Because it's really hard, and it's hard to know what people like. And I think there's also a lot of dynamics inside larger companies of why it's difficult for larger companies to build products. Imagine if you went to Facebook and you're working and you're like, hey, I have this idea. It's going to be like the Facebook photos, except it's disappearing. So we can send pictures of our poop and send nudes, right? You'd be like fired. So the idea here is that you need to have a lot of these great, if you look at most of the really successful consumer companies, they started off as side projects. So I really highly encourage you guys to, if you're interested in doing this, just build stuff that doesn't sound like a company. If it sounds like a company, it's probably not going to be a good consumer product. But if it's like, hey, I just have this one thing that I want to do, and it's really dumb and it's really stupid, but I'm just going to build it, right? Like that is where that's where Facebook happened. That's where Snapchat happened. That's where like Instagram, that's where a lot of these products are built. So what we did is we said, look, it's super hard to text our friends. We just want to make it really easy to text people. So we built this thing. it was so funny because like we thought no one was going to use it. So we literally, it was one page. The whole app was this one button. I literally took the design that ended up being our branding for like 2 years. Was I Googled button PSD because we used Photoshop or Sketchfile at the time. And then I took the first link and then I put it in the app, and that was our design of our app, right? And people pay like $500,000 to like design their app, and I just like copy this thing. It just shows you how ghetto it was. So another thing we did was we just put in the app our phone number, because we're like, literally only our 3 friends are going to use this. No one's going to use it. And I'm not going to build an onboarding for 3 friends. I'm just going to put my phone number in, and they can text us if they want to text us, if they have any questions, right? So literally the whole app was one screen. I'll try to find some images. Whole app was one screen, had one button that said, I'm down to lunch. And when you pressed it, it sent a push notification to all your friends. There was no friending, there's no contacts, there's nothing. Like, send a push notification to anyone else who was in your contacts that had the app also. So it's like, hey, Nikil wants to get food, do you want to hang out? And then when you tap the notification, it would open up a text message so you could text them back. That was the whole app. It was right. And then there's one other button in the app, and it was text Joe, Nikil if you have any questions, right? That was it. That was like the entire product. And it wasn't even on the App Store in the beginning. It was just on so there's a little hack on, so Android makes it really easy to deploy apps. Apple makes it really hard. And there was a hack that people did at the time. You weren't supposed to do this, but basically you could, inside it was called enterprise deploy. So inside a company, if you want to deploy apps internally, like if Facebook wants to deploy to their team, their company, they can deploy it. So we just made a company account. We made the enterprise app. And then I just posted the link on my Facebook. And I was like, yeah, here's this app. It's kind of a joke. We just made it for fun. It blows up. Like, holy shit. It literally went to a party an hour later. Everyone is in the app. It's like everyone's pressing it. It's like blowing up. The next day, there was this whole like crazy thing. And like we found out Google was like trying to clone it after that. And the next day, and I made this post literally within like a couple days, like I think like a day or two, it was like around the world. It was insane, right? And again, I don't want to make this seem like an overnight success or anything like that. Like we had built 12 products before this. And probably at that time, probably like 7 or 8 products before this in that company. And before that, I built a bunch of stuff, right? So it had taken all these learnings and lessons and compounded it over and over and over. So we kind of knew what made an app good or what made it bad. And this one, again, if you want to make a successful consumer product, the number one thing to do is not try to build a successful consumer product. Just build something as dumb and as simple as you can that solve like a really concrete, specific need for you, right? So we build this app. So one of the first things that starts happening is my phone starts blowing up because all these people are starting to use the app, right? Oh, actually, a little bit of story. So this was May. So the app started spiking, and then it kind of tapered off because it was summer, and like turns out that college students really love this, and we were out of school. So we actually stopped kind of working on it. Most people don't know this part of the story. We actually stopped working on it because we're like, people aren't really using it. And then this like kid who I actually know pretty well now in the University of Georgia found the app and literally like went door to door and signed up hundreds of his friends on campus. Because one of the things you have to realize, Stanford's very different, has a really tight community. And there's an interesting inverse proportionality. When you have a small dorm, you're actually friends with way more people. Let's say you have a dorm of 80, you'll probably know 50 of them and then be friends with probably 20 of them. If you have a dorm of 500 people, you'll actually only know like 3 or 4 people, because there's a switch that happens when you have a small community. Everyone is default a friend, where you're like, oh, I haven't met you, like, let me introduce myself. Versus if you have a large community, everyone's default a stranger, and you have, ironically, a much smaller circle. So what we found in other communities was actually this big kind of opportunity where people felt isolated in almost every other school in the country besides Stanford, right? So it starts blowing up across the country. Joe and I literally start getting 5,000 text messages a day on our phone. So it turns out after you get the badge, it's about 14,700 text messages. Your little badge icon stops counting. It just won't count anymore. And then after about 20 or 30,000 text messages, your phone doesn't get any more calls. So like we didn't get calls for a straight 6 months. Like you couldn't reach us. And we actually have to email the CEO of Apple. We emailed Tim. We're like, Tim, because I had gone to the Apple store for like 2 days and I couldn't do anything because it was literally like we were breaking iMessage's infrastructure, right? And I was like, Tim, you have to help us. I was like, we were almost neighbors. We're like, we were almost neighbors. You have to help me. Like my phone doesn't work, right? And this app is blowing up. It was just like a Hail Mary. I get a call 2 days later. It's like, hey, this is Tim's executive team. Like he read your email. He wants us to help us out. So we end up talking to the iMessage people. Turns out, I was like, guys, come on. I'm an engineer. Like, don't tell me your iMessage infrastructure can't handle like 10,000, 20,000 text messages a day. Like, this is ridiculous, right? And I was like, there's no way we're one of the top users. They're like, well, like, I was like, don't tell me we get more texts than Justin Bieber. And they're like, well, you know, I can't say, but yeah. I was like, really? Like, where are we? Like top 10? What, top 5? Like, they're like, yeah, you guys are like one of the top. Like, they didn't say exactly, but they told us we were top 10 iMessage users in the entire world. Because think about this, millions of people around the world have our phone number. The app like starts blowing up. We're number 1 on the App Store. And so it was actually pretty crazy. Like, one day I wake up and it's like, you know, down to lunch, it's on the app. This is back when the App Store had rankings. Now they hide all the rankings, but it's like down to lunch. I think at the time it was like Messenger, or it was like Snapchat, Messenger, Facebook, WhatsApp. It was like literally we were the top. It was insane. It was like we had like celebrities like showing up at our apartment. We were like, our servers were melting down. We were doubling our database like every 24 hours. It was like crazy times. I still remember there were days we just didn't leave our apartment for like, Joe and I lived together at the time, my co-founder, and we didn't leave our apartment for like 6-7 days in a row. And then at that time, like the power was going out in our apartment. We had a gas leak. None of our phones worked. Like, I remember one day I looked up and I was like, oh my God, it's 5 a.m. I was like, when did I start working? It was like 9 a.m. It had been 9 to 5, like 9 a.m. to 5 a.m. the next day, 20 hours straight, like hadn't like moved, hadn't done anything, but I didn't feel tired. I was like, this is awesome. So energized, right? You know, ended up being on the front page, like the cover story for the New York Times. It was like millions of people around. So it was like such a crazy journey. And I'm happy to talk more about the journey, but a few of the lessons that I would share around building products. So number 1, I think it's really hard when you're looking at now to understand how awesome of a class this is. I honestly wish we had more classes like what Rahul is teaching right now. This is building. So I think Stanford does an amazing job teaching you the fundamentals of computer science. I think now they're doing a better job kind of teaching you how to build products, but actually building products is the most important kind of lesson you can take away from kind of a class like this. And I think there was an iPhone class when I took it, and I think the Android class. And one of the things also to remember is, you know, iPhone is where we are in Silicon Valley in America. It's like iPhone's like really popular, but the rest of the world in most of America actually is hugely Android, and that's a huge opportunity. And I think it's like very, in our culture, it's like very kind of downplayed, but there are way more Androids, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's way more Android phones than iPhones. And it's actually interesting. So Samsung actually makes, I found out recently, Samsung makes the iPhone displays, and Samsung actually keeps the best displays for the Samsung phones. And then a year or two later, we'll give it to iPhone. So iPhone actually always has like, even the iPhone like 12s Max or whatever, that has displays that are 2 or 3 years old from Samsung, or maybe 1 or 2 years old from Samsung. So what I'm saying is like, it's like an amazing opportunity. And I wish like there were more classes like this, like Rahul was teaching when I was there. But I think, you know, when I'm thinking back to some of the lessons that we had, the number 1 thing is build things. You never know what's going to stick. The second thing I would say is really talk to your users and know them, right? Like, we would get added to group chats with our users. I would literally spend sometimes 10 hours a day just like texting our users. And I became really good friends with a lot of these like random people around the world who would just text me, right? And one of the things we got to do was like drive really great product feedback loops from that. All of our features, it was never us like trying to come up with stuff. People were just like, we want this, like, please make this. So we made down to lunch. Then we're like, can you add down to dinner? And then you can add down to breakfast. And like, can you add down to frat party? And then can you have a specific one for our college? And we did all these things, and it was super, super cool. And it was like a really, really great experience. And I think, you know, as you go through, some of you will go build great products, some of you will do other things, but you know, one of the coolest things, so at this time we had a ton of like investors showing up, people want to give us money. We were like, no, we're not taking you meetings. They were like, you know, like Jay-Z wants to talk to you. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I listen to One Direction. Like, this is not interesting to me. And you know, and the media was there and press was there. All that stuff is fine. But the number 1 kind of like coolest thing, in my opinion, for like me personally, is the ability to create, the ability to make something. Like in high school, I was very into like cars and computers and building, like I used to street race and like build computers and all these things. But, you know, suddenly when you have the ability to create things, that completely changes the game. And the best feeling in the world is making something and having even like one other person use it and telling you like, yo, that made my day better. That made my life better. Like, thank you. So I think, I'll pause here and I want to answer some questions, but that feeling is something that you can only get with the ability to make things. And what I, again, just want to emphasize, like, you guys, number 1, enjoy your time at Stanford. This is going to be so, and I know it's remote, but make the most of it. This is such a special time. You'll never have this time ever again. And it's such an amazing, amazing experience. And I know Rahul's probably gonna hate me for saying this, but like also like the most important thing is like hang out with your friends. And I think that is something that's really undervalued. Like school is fine and school is great, but the reason you're there is to like meet amazing people. The second thing I would say is really, really, really take as much as you can from this class, because it's the ability to create. Like when you go out and you're doing your normal job and you're like, hey, I want to build something on the side. If you have this class, it's really hard to get started building Android, right? Like Joe and I, we needed an Android version of the app. Joe and I, and the thing, we had hired this contractor, it didn't work out. We paid them and they didn't give us anything. So we're like, crap. So Joe and I had literally, and one of the guys who actually ended up working with us for a long time, who had seen one of my Facebook posts and who was in class, he was in the advanced computer vision class with us. He was like, oh yeah, I kind of know Android. I did a couple years ago, I can help you. So the three of us sat down in one day and wrote the whole Android app. And me and Joe had never written Android before. So it was like kind of crazy for us. So, and the point is that, you have the ability to make things. And that is so special and that is so valuable that if you harness that, you will have unimaginable opportunities. It's so rare that someone can actually have an idea and take it all the way to creation, that skill is like the most valuable skill in the world. And I would just say like really, really, really take as much away as you can from this class, because next time you have an idea, if the difference is like, oh yeah, I kind of remember Android and it takes me like a month to build it versus I can build it in like 3 hours, that could mean the difference between you building the next Facebook or not, right? So yeah, anyway, I'm going to pause here. I know we have 5 minutes, want to answer questions. And those kind of like random set of stories, but happy to tell more stories, happy to answer any questions or talk about anything.
I love it. I think, honestly, Nikil, I've known him for a long time. This is like a fraction of the amazing stories that you could tell. And I'm just so glad that you're able to be here and share some of that. I have just like one kind of two-part question. And then after that, I'd love for students to also ask. So my question is, I think it's fair to say that you're a prolific builder. You just build. Yeah. You said you've built like, 50 or 60 different things.
Yeah.
So my question is, what do you do prior to building? Like, how do you go about that user validation or user need process? And also, when you build, is the decision to build primarily based on like what you know? Like, if I know iOS, I'm going to do that. Or I know web development, I'm going to do that. Or how do you figure out what platform to build on first?
That's a great question. Okay, so two-part question. One is, what does a process of like pre-build to build look like? And the second part is, how do you decide what platform to build on first? So I think, so it's interesting. The process of pre-build to build, I think it changes based on if you are doing this as just like a hobby thing on the side, or you're like, hey, I really want to put some time and maybe turn it into something that could be full-time, right? So let me start with the company. So let's say you're actually like, I want to make a company. I would definitely do a ton of user research beforehand. I actually wouldn't start building anything until I talked to a bunch of people and like really validated the idea. There's something called the Mom Test, which is a book. I think it's like the best book on user testing. So highly recommend that. And I really like, I think again, if you really want to build a company, do not write a line of code before you validate the product you're building is what you actually want to build. So like for one of the companies we started, we sold $500,000 software before we really wrote any code, right? And that was the way I think it should be done, because otherwise you build a bunch of stuff and people may not want it. If you want to do a hobby project, that's completely opposite, right? Like I don't even think you should try to like validate stuff. I think you should be like, the best way to do it is solve a user problem that you actually have. Like most of my stuff, let me tell you one story. So, okay. So for example, are any of you guys Stanford football fans? Okay. So back in the day, like my freshman year, we were the worst team in the country. We were 0-10 and we played Washington State, who was 0-10. I'm from Texas. And I was just like, I don't know what's going on. And then Jim Harbaugh came the next year and like it started taking off, right? So for those of you who don't know, like Jim Harbaugh came, we almost go to national championship in like 4 years. It was like crazy, right? And then we got a new coach, David Shaw, who I think is still there. And for those of you who've seen David Shaw and Jim Harbaugh's like crazy, jumping up and down, yelling, screaming. David Shaw is like totally stoked, right? And one day I just thought this was really funny. So I made this website that was you can still go to it, I think, facesofshaw.com and Faces of Harbaugh, and you like compare them kind of. And, it was just so dumb, right? Like who makes stuff like this? It was just me and my sister one day, like we were bored. We were like, oh, this is cool. This is funny, right? From that, this one guy from Stanford saw it. He was a couple years older than me, and he saw it. He had just sold his company to Yahoo, and he was like, "Oh, you should totally come. You should totally we should hang out." I was like, "Oh yeah, cool." I had gone back to Texas, and I was like, "Oh, I'll hang out when we're back in SF." His name's Eric Goldman. So he messages me when I come back, and he had gone to Dropbox, right? And at that time, and this time Dropbox was kind of smallish company, medium-sized company. And he was like, "Oh, you should come hang out." So I go there, hang out, end up meeting their kind of guy who's their CTO, head of engineering guy. And that guy was like, "Yo, you really got to come. Can we buy you?" Like literally while we're there, he's like, "Hey, do you want to join? Can we buy your company?" I'm like, I'm not really even a company. It's just me. And he's like, "Oh, you should join Dropbox." I'm like, "No, I'm good." And then like we kind of kept in touch. And then later on, he was like the third engineer at Facebook, and he ended up being CTO of Dropbox. And then him and his wife invested in our company, and we became good friends. And like then he helped us with sales. So it's just like you never know where these things go. Literally, this was a stupid website that my sister and I made like one time, right? Or like I made this other site. I love Zoolander. I made this other website called howtobluesteel.com. And for those of you guys are probably way too young to see Zoolander, but great movie. So I think the point about this is saying you don't know what these hobby things are going to end up as. And I really think you should, if you have an idea that you think is like, you shouldn't do it because you think it's a good idea. You should do it and other people would use it. Do it because you have a real problem. And that is the ultimate best way to build something that's valuable. Because if it's not a real thing to you, like if you're like, "Oh, I don't have this problem, but like other people might have this problem," maybe you're right, but like chances are you're probably not right because you're not a domain expert in that area. And if you solve your own problem, that's the best way to build something that's really valuable, right? And then the second part about like the device. So I think this answer changes. Like back in the day, I'm going to really date myself. Like iPhones just weren't that popular. Like mobile phones just like weren't that popular. So I graduated in 2010. iPhone had come out in 2008. Android was just kind of coming out. So everything was on the web, right? Then pretty quickly, everything switched to mobile. And I think the short answer is, I think it's a two-part thing. I think you should design for whatever demographic you want the user to be, right? So for when we were on campus, most people didn't have iPhones. So we built for web. And then afterwards, we're like, hey, my demographic, which is college students, all have iPhones. So we're going to build for iPhones. And I think one of the really cool things about Android is there's massive emerging markets. And you've seen like TikTok like blew up, right? And that was from Asia. And I think if you do something that captures one of these emerging markets like China, or I know China's a little hard, but like the other places like India or other countries around the world, South America, there is a massive user base that is not getting inundated with like new apps all the time. And so I would strongly, like if you know Android and you have friends in other countries or who grew up in other countries, build something for there and it would be amazing because you have this untapped market, not a lot of competition, and people who will just like spread stuff like crazy. And you see what happens with like TikTok, with if you guys have seen TikTok or WeChat or these kind of products, they go from like 0 to like hundreds of millions of users super fast just because the population is much bigger. And in the US, there's a shit ton of competition. Sorry, I don't say that. There's a ton of competition for very limited mind share, and it's just not that way. So if you guys know how to do Android, I would highly recommend. I think generally go for your target demographic, and if you're open to ideas, try to target demographic. And I know it's a little counterintuitive to like build your own product, but find someone who has like a deep problem there and go for that.
I love it. That's great advice. I know we're a little bit over, but I'd love to have just one question, at least one from a student. Can anyone, you can either put it in the chat or just say it, and Nikhil's here. Looking back over the past 10 years, what would you do differently?
Absolutely. So I think I'll answer this in like 3 ways. So first, I think there's like a really great answer from Mark Andreessen, the guy who built the first web browser, and Michael Jordan. Yes, you guys know who Michael Jordan is. And I think that they both said this, and I subscribe to the same thing. I don't have any regrets. Like, I wouldn't do anything differently, because at any time in life, you do what you think is best with the information that you have, right? And then there's kind of this other question of like, if I know what I knew now, what would I go back and do differently? Which is like a different question. But if you know at any given point, you do what you think you should be doing, right? So in that sense, like I don't have any regrets. And most of the toughest losses were honestly like the best lessons. They were mistakes that we made. I've made mistakes that have single-handedly cost our company $500,000. And then that mistake was so seared into my mind that it helped me close like millions of dollars in sales later on. So it was like a good lesson, right? So let me answer that in 2 parts, college and post-college. I think honestly, like I talk to a lot of people and people are whenever you talk, a lot of people say like, hey, I talked to other people who graduated college and their biggest regret was like not hanging out with their friends enough and spending too much time in school. I have zero regrets about that. I hung out with my friends all the time. I had the best. I think that literally Stanford was like my only, like Stanford was like literally the best time ever. And I have zero regrets. The only regret I have is like, I never won an intramural championship. We came really close and we were like in the finals a couple of times. We actually had a couple of interns this summer, but one of them was like, oh yeah, here's my intramural champion shirt. The other one was like, here's my national champion shirt. They're both from Stanford. And I was like, great, I just got like showed up by our interns. And then the post-college life, I think the biggest lesson, I think there's a couple lessons. One is if you're doing a startup, it's very intense and it's very lonely. So I think the first thing is like, there's a ton of lessons here, but I would say the three biggest ones. Find a great co-founder. Like that is the single most important decision you make in your company. And it is like you're being married. It's more than you're being married, right? Like my co-founder and I, we lived together for 5 years. Like I saw him 24/7. We've never gotten into an argument ever. Literally the best person I've ever worked with. And the company like that, there's no way it would have come anywhere close to where we are now without Joe, right? So I think that is the single best decision I made. That is the most important decision you can make. The second thing I would say is startups are really like a marathon where you're running really fast. But I think looking back, I would go back and try to live slightly more balanced, focus on health, focus on sleeping, focus on like all those things that are important in that part of your life. It's still not going to be like you're balanced by any means. If you're doing a startup, there's no work-life balance. Like you just got to get that out of your head, unless like balance is like 99-1, right? And you sacrifice a lot. Like Bill Gates said he didn't take one day off in his entire 20s, right? So like there is a cost. And I actually think this, if most people knew, everyone's like, oh, Bill Gates is richest, or Jeff Bezos, richest people in the world, right? If you knew what it took to live that life, even if you guarantee that amount of money, guarantee you like 99% of people wouldn't want to do it. So I think just like coming into that with knowing what it takes. And I think the third thing, which is probably the most applicable and the most relevant here, is one of the biggest mistakes that we made in the beginning was you need to dissociate your ego from the product you build, right? And this is why Sam Altman has a great post on this. The most great companies start off as side projects, because you can say, oh, this is just this dumb app we built to like text our friends. This is not a real thing. So as a result, you'll promote it to people, you'll get it out early, you'll get people testing it, you're willing to throw it away, you will iterate on it. Versus if you think it's your company or what you're actually doing, you'll be super scared. You'll be afraid of rejection. And this happened to me, right? When we built some of the earlier products, I'm like, oh man, I need to make sure it's perfect. I need to make it good. Like I need to make sure that I don't, that it's serious and people like it and it's like a serious thing. And what ends up happening is you don't ship anything, and you build and you build and you build. And then like a year later, I mean, it wasn't a year for me. It was like maybe months. I was like, wow, when you finally put it out there, you're like, oh, wow, no one likes this. And then you're just not, you need this ego shield. And one of the best ego shields is, this is not a real thing. This is like a side project, right? And kind of intentional to this is you need to ship as early as possible. If you feel like it's ready to ship, you waited way too long, right? And I think Reid Hoffman has a great quote about that. He made LinkedIn, is one of our investors. He always says like, if you feel like this is ready to go, you waited way too long to ship it. You need to ship it when you're like, holy crap, like people are going to like throw this in my face because it's like not even functional. That's when you need to ship it, right? Because the iteration cycle is the most important things. And last story and let you guys go is the iteration cycle is the most important thing. So one of the secret sauces that we had, so at that time it took 2 weeks. So Android doesn't have this, which is awesome, but Apple had a review process to go in the App Store. You had to submit your app, and it took 2 weeks for them to say, okay, to push a new update, right? Which was insane, right? So think of any normal company. You're at Facebook. What do? You spend a week or two doing user research. You spend another week or two kind of like building the product. Then you put in the app, you put a submission request. 2 weeks later, it comes out. Then, and then after that, you do another week of collecting data and you go on. So you're talking about like a 1 to 2 month iteration cycle for new features of the app, right? So we were like, look, there's just no way we can, like speed is the name of the game in consumer social, like building apps. So we would actually go to Berkeley, dress up as students, and basically like pretend. It actually got to a point where people started recognizing us, and all these students at Berkeley were like, wait, don't you not go here? And we would just go talk to random people, and we would actually like get feedback from there and code the app, right? And then we were like, and we'd go back home and code the app. So we get feedback instead of a month, we cut it down to a day, right? And then what we did was we actually took our computers to Berkeley and we would show someone the app and we would get their feedback, and then we'd plug the phone into the computer, sit on the steps at Berkeley, and then like recode the product, right? And what that did is we cut our 2-month iteration cycle down into literally 3 minutes. So now think about this. Facebook or Google or whoever's, Google tried to clone us, Facebook tried to clone us. They're shipping a new app every, like, call it a month, like that month of iteration. That's like generous, right? We're shipping every 3 minutes, right? Who's going to win this, right? There's just like there's no way. And they end up shutting down those teams because they just couldn't compete with us. So really, whatever you can do to get your iteration, and luckily that's changed now. Like we used to ship, like now the App Store review cycles come a lot tighter. And so what I would say is talk to your users, don't be afraid of shipping product, like ship it way too early and just build a bunch of stuff. And I think the other thing is like, make sure you love it. Like, startup is like super stressful. If you just want to make a ton of money, I guarantee you there's a lot of better ways to like make a ton of money, right? So 100%. So like if you're doing it for the money, you're not going to enjoy it, and it'll be a lot of stress. If you're doing because you love it and because you have the chance to build something that improves life for every person on the planet, it is the best and most fulfilling thing you could ever do. So,
all right, one more live question. What was the first thing you built, and how skilled were you when you started?
So my first thing I built was, and this was back, okay, so man, now I feel so old. I always like, I remember when we had these interns back in the day, or probably like your guys age, they were in like high school, college, when we were post-college, and I kind of let on how old I would be really cool. We were like Snapchat friends, all this stuff, and then we're Instagram friends. And then one day I accidentally let on how old I was, and I was like, yeah, we didn't have iPhone until like sophomore year of college. And they're like, what? How old are you? What are you doing? I was like, no, I'm cool. Don't worry about it. I'm cool. So when I was in 6th grade, so I was really lucky because my mom actually started a software company. So I got to like have computers around me growing up. When I was in 6th grade, to give you a sense, I grew up in a small town in Texas. We still have these things called dictionaries in class. So like these big ass books that you like look up words in, right? Do you guys know what dictionary is? You've heard of dictionary? Yeah. Okay, cool. So, the internet was a thing that people had heard of. Like people had heard of the internet, but it was not, this was 2001. And people had heard about the internet, like in my small town. I mean, there's all these like big companies and stuff, but like in Lubbock, Texas, people had heard about the internet. People didn't really use it, didn't really know what it was, kind of. So I remember the first thing I ended up building was this website for this book report that we had. So I used to like making websites. There's this thing called Microsoft Front Page, which I'm sure none of you have ever heard, that basically like let you kind of like create drag and drop websites. And everyone did a book report like on a poster board or on like their like a piece of paper. And I made this website. It's for this book called The Golden Compass and the Subtle Knife. I don't know if you guys have read this book. Really good book. So I made that and had like these secret things. And after that, I started kind of making like a little bit of websites. And then one summer we tried to make a video game. I don't know if you have played Area 51. So we kind of like filmed ourselves like in commando gear with like toy guns, like, and we would pretend to be the bad guys. And then we like built this video game in Flash. I didn't really build it. I just kind of started building it and ended up playing like StarCraft all summer and jumping off bike ramps. So I like kind of did stuff. And then after that, I did these math and science competitions in Texas. And I actually built I built this like forum to like talk to basically help people like communicate about that. I didn't really know how to program. We didn't have any really programming classes at our high school. My first class really was like CS 106A when I came to Stanford. And I think the thing about building is you never know. No one ever knows how to build. And actually, like Mark Zuckerberg was not a computer science student. He was a psychology major, right? You just start doing. And most of the code of all these companies is complete crap, right? Like I remember I talked to this guy who Jerry Kane was like, this is the best engineer that Facebook has ever had and will ever have. He's this guy, Evan. And I remember he wrote this blog post about it. He was like, I was from like the Midwest or like Maine, and like I came here and I applied to Facebook, and it was like all these Harvard people and Stanford people and all stuff. And then I saw the code, and this one Facebook had millions of users. It was like one large PHP file. Like that was the whole code base, right? So it's just like, do not worry about if your code's bad, if you don't know how to build, if you don't know all these things, like just start building. And the code behind most of these products looks like shit. I try to think I like write good code, but really quickly you'll learn. And also, I think this is another thing. I think you guys are so intellectual and so smart that this theory that's like, I need to learn everything. I just want to learn, right? And I actually think the best way to learn is you just start building shit. And when you start building, you're like, oh, you know what? I don't know how to do this database thing, so I'm just going to hack something together. And the thing is, like, instead of learning all this useless stuff, you actually learn the stuff that's relevant to you, and you'll figure it out. So I would just say, like, build something super simple. If you can't build it in like a day, it's too complicated. Like build something that will take you less than a day for your first time. Even if that is just literally a web page that says, here's my name, hello world, and it's just a static HTML page. If that's all you can do, great. And also one kind of thing, I haven't done this in like 10 years, but you should definitely build a personal website. That is one of the most high leverage things you can do. I built one like 10 years ago, and it's honestly one of the best time things I put in. You can check it. Mine's nikilster.com. It's not even like mobile optimized. I literally haven't updated in like 5-10 years, but I would definitely start doing that. The other thing I would say, I think this is the most important thing. This is not the most important. This is one of the most important things about building products is really make sure that you ship it. Like 80% of the value comes from actually putting it out there. You know, I said I have like Dropbox, like 50 different projects, 30 to 50 different projects. 99% of the value I've gotten in my life out of those things have come from like the 3 things that I've shipped or the 4 things that I've shipped. All of the value comes from that. It's great as like a theoretical exercise to build stuff, but it doesn't really count for your life at all if you don't ship it. And you learn so much from shipping it. And shipping it could just mean I'm going to post it on my Facebook and then text people about it, right? Also, like you got to hustle. Like I think as engineers, you just assume like, oh, people like build this and it works, right? And people come use it. That is like not true at all. That is such a lie that is told by everyone in Silicon Valley. Literally the first day we did Down to Lunch, I think like I texted like 200 people in my contacts. I was like, you got to get this. This is after it started blowing up. I was like, you have to get this. This is going to be great. I genuinely wanted my friends to get it because I wanted them to hang out. So there's a lot of hustle behind the scenes and just like make sure you're hustling. Like that's the most important thing. All right. I'll end with telling this one is always like a favorite whenever I give talks. Keith Schwartz story. Do you guys know Keith Schwartz? Have you guys taken a class with Keith? So Keith Schwartz lived 2 doors down from me freshman year, which is honestly kind of funny because my freshman roommate is like objectively famous in real life. Do you guys follow basketball? Who's a basketball fan? Do you guys know the Bucks, the Milwaukee Bucks? Do you know Robin Lopez, Brooke Lopez? So Robin and I were freshman roommates. We shared a room like this big, right? So Robin is like objectively famous in real life. Like he has like crazy hair. He's like 7 feet tall. His twin brother is 7 feet tall. We went to Disney. Me and Brooke and Robin went to Disney World together, and it was just like literally we got stopped every 5 minutes. It was insane. I was like, this kind of sucks. Actually, I wouldn't want to be like celeb like that. So, but when I give talks at Stanford, everyone's like, who the heck is Robin? I have no idea. And they're like, whoa, Keith Schwartz, Chris Peach, what? So one of the funny stories about Keith. I have a lot of funny stories about Keith, but Chris, but Keith's story. So Keith lived 2 doors down from me freshman year in Otero. And like Keith was very good at programming coming in, right? Like I had never really programmed, and Keith would like help me with some assignments and stuff. Like, do you guys remember the Boggle assignment 106B? Do you take Boggle? So, you know, like there's some that one's hard to extend because like they give you the graphics thing, but Keith literally is like, oh, I wrote a Boggle extension. I was like, what is it? He like made his own graphics library and wrote like 3D Boggle. I was like, what is this, right? And so one day he's actually 2 funny stories. I still remember he was like really nervous for his section leading exam. For those of you watching online, it's like to apply to be a TA. And he was like, hey, like, can I like practice on you? So he's like teaching me backtrack recursion Carol outside of our whiteboard, outside bathroom. I just remember thinking in my head, I was like, dude, you're gonna be like a great teacher someday. I can just tell, right? You're gonna be great. And obviously did not realize like what he would return to. But one of my favorite stories about Keith is he comes out of I'm walking down the bathroom and he's like, oh, I see Keith. I'm like, hey, what are you up to? And he's like, oh man, I've just been like, I'm taking a break from coding. I've been coding all day, which is what Keith did all day, every day, like code, right? But I asked him what, I was like, what are you doing? Taking a break. I was like, oh, he's gonna go like party or like play Frisbee or like, you know, go downtown. He's like, oh, you know, I actually we just come back from Thanksgiving or spring break. He said, oh, I actually left my alarm clock at home. I was like, oh, great, you're gonna go to Target. Like, yeah, I might come, I need some stuff, right? So he's like, yeah, I need something to wake me up. I was like, oh, cool, you're in Target. He's like, no, and I literally quote you this. He's like, I wrote a command line program that I input in arguments in by the command line, and it'll turn on my computer and turn on my sound volume and wake me up at a given time. I was like, that basically sums up Keith in thing. Like, brilliant, genius. Like, I would have just gone to Target, but like Keith is like, I'm gonna hack my computer to do this crazy thing that was like not easy to do because I love it, right? And I think, again, going back to this thing about you love it, one time I think Keith was like, I'm gonna code up every algorithm. I was like, what do you mean every algorithm? He's like, yeah, every algorithm that exists. I was like, that is such a Keith thing to say, but that is freaking awesome, right? So again, going back to do what you love, and then I have a lot more funny stories. But thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. And if I can be helpful, feel free to reach out. I'll give Rahul my info. You can email me. It's on my website also. Feel free to like DM me on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and happy to answer any questions, and good luck.
Yeah, I'll speak for everyone here. Thanks so much, Nikil. This is such a great story that you have, and thanks for sharing it with us. This is amazing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Rate me 6 stars on Yelp, please. You leave a good review. All right, see you guys.